The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I'm going to start off a little bit differently today. I want to really take you through an article that was published yesterday in Vice by an author named Sulome Anderson. The article is called "What My Dad's Kidnapping by Muslim Terrorists Taught Me About Islamophobia." And the article's author writes about what she describes as her father being abducted by Muslim militants in Lebanon. It contains a mix of reasonable comments and some pretty unhinged criticisms. And the article addresses the David Pakman Show, and it addresses me, and it says some things that make sense and some things that don't. So, for example, the article correctly says Donald Trump's proposed ban on Muslim travel is outrageous. Of course it is. The article is absolutely right about that. But it also criticizes critiques of people like Reza Aslan, like our critique, which now on YouTube, as I talk to you today, has over 250,000 views on YouTube. So let's start with the paragraph from Ms. Anderson's article about that. And she says, "It's not always easy to publicly point out the inaccuracy of media depictions of Islam, especially in the modern American environment. Aslan has been attacked for his efforts by everyone from Pamela Geller to YouTuber David Pakman, who has dedicated several episodes of his show to questioning Aslan's credentials and trying to poke holes in his arguments. For instance, Aslan maintained on CNN that female genital mutilation is a Central African problem, not a Muslim problem, as is commonly believed, an explanation that has been rated mostly true by PolitiFact. Pakman, who didn't respond to my requests for comment, presents his own stats on his show, which would seem to contradict Aslan's. But how would a viewer distinguish between the two perspectives? And since 80% of Muslims do not practice FGM, isn't it important to clarify that the brutal mutilation of a woman's genitals is not a mainstream Muslim custom, so as not to add to the general environment of ignorance and bigotry?" Okay. Let's break this down piece by piece. I want to show you how there is nothing factual being said here in this article. The entire supposed critique of our criticism of Reza Aslan actually says zero. We need to be able to read an article like this, which claims to be, purports to be some kind of critique of our piece. It says nothing, and I will explain that to you piece by piece. First of all, including the David Pakman Show and Pamela Geller in the same paragraph is absolutely absurd, but I want to not even deal with that because there are far bigger fish to fry here. First of all, YouTuber David Pakman, who has dedicated several episodes of his show to questioning Aslan's credentials. I'm not sure there's a single correct statement in there other than my name, which happens to be spelled correctly. If you say to me, what's accurate in that paragraph, the spelling of my name is the only thing I can point to. YouTuber is wrong, right? This show was on YouTube only years after being a syndicated radio show, which it still is, syndicated TV show. It's also broadcast on national satellite TV. So YouTuber is wrong. If someone doesn't know the show, they're already misled by the first word, YouTuber David Pakman. Then, has dedicated several episodes of his show to questioning Aslan's credentials. First of all, we have never dedicated an entire episode of the show to Reza Aslan. Dating back to July of 2013, that was the first time Reza Aslan was mentioned on this show. We did 4 clips, right? 4 clips. Each clip is about 1/9 of an episode. We did 4 clips about Reza Aslan, one of which was exclusively positive after he had that crazy viral interview on Fox News with Lauren Green. So dedicated several episodes, completely incorrect statement. We've dedicated 4 standalone clips, which are a fraction of an episode, to Reza Aslan. Now, as far as, quote, questioning his credentials, we did a critique of how he presents his credentials as one portion of one of those 4 clips, which represents 1/9 of each episode, right? So we're talking about 1/3 times 1/4 times 1/9. That's the fraction of our Reza Aslan coverage as a portion of our episodes that has been devoted to Reza Aslan's credentials. That was one of the many topics in that critique, you'll remember, Reza Aslan's credentials. In other words, the first sentence contains almost no truth at all. Is this some kind of great investigative journalism? And I'll continue. Then Sulome Anderson goes on to say, for instance, Aslan maintained on CNN that FGM is a Central African problem, not a Muslim problem, as is commonly believed, an explanation that has been rated mostly true by PolitiFact. Pacman, who didn't respond to my requests for comment, presents his own stats. Let's break that down, and you will see there is nothing here. First, about whether or not I responded to requests for comment. Sulome Anderson says I did not respond to requests, plural, for comment. That is a lie, and I have the screenshots to prove that I did respond. Let's start with the first one. On April 20th, I received an email from Sulome Anderson. This was a request, singular, for comment. Dear Mr. Pacman, I hope this finds you well. I'm a journalist with Vice, and I'm working on a story about the intellectual debate over Islamophobia in the media. I was hoping to be able to briefly chat with you over the phone in the next couple of days. I can be reached at my email. Thanks, and I look forward to hearing from you. I Googled Sulome Anderson. I had a sense that this might be a sort of adversarial type of piece with regard to my involvement. So I wrote back, and I'll show you the email I wrote to her saying, hey, Sulome, glad to speak with you. Can you tell me more about the scope and angle on the piece? If there's a good fit for my voice, I'm glad to schedule time to speak with you, although it'll be a bit trickier in the next few days since I'm at a conference, but I'm sure we can make it happen. Sulome got right back to me. So already I have responded to the request for comment, right? Already she's lying in the Vice piece. And she says, Mr. Pacman, thanks for your quick response. I should first say this is a reported essay more than an article. I've watched some of your stuff on this topic, and I want to first say I respect your curiosity and open acknowledgement of the nuanced nature of the subject. You at least recognize it's dangerous to paint all Muslims with the extremist brush. Frankly, I do have some problems with your treatment of the topic, which I'll get into in a minute, but I want to be completely transparent in saying this is not an objective article per se. She goes on to give some background about her father's story, and then at the end of this email tells me, as I will show you here, if any of this sounds so that being said, while I recognize that your coverage is more nuanced than some, I was immediately drawn to your criticism of Reza Aslan and wanted to talk to you about that. Not so much your problems with his credentials as the intellectual debate over some of the topics related to Islam, because I want to explore the importance of accuracy and including context in this discussion. I'm not trying to crucify anyone. I'm a professional journalist, so while this is technically an essay, I will be as fair and balanced as possible. I want to have a conversation with about how you, as a progressive media voice, discuss Islam and include your perspective. So I, after hearing this, realized this is an essay, right? Number one. Number two, it's going to be an interview over the phone where then any piece of it can be used and put in print to suit anyone's purpose. And I didn't really think it made sense for me to participate. So I wrote back to Ms. Anderson and I said, understood, I'm sure you can understand my hesitation when it is a context where what I say will be taken selectively. I often do TV and radio interviews as I present my words myself in an audiovisual format, and they're available in total for the audience. But when I've done interviews for written pieces, it's happened quite often that pieces of what I say are used in a way that is often not accurate or self-serving. She wrote back to me saying, well, I hope that you end up participating. Let's go back to the article now. She says, Pacman, who didn't respond to my requests for comment, certainly not accurate, certainly not more than one request as implied. We had a very specific exchange about my hesitation. Now let's get into the real meat of it, as if all of that wasn't enough. She implies we made stuff up in the Aslan clip. She says, Pacman presents his own stats. If you look at the citations in our video on Reza Aslan, you'll notice that some of the citations are the same sources Reza Aslan has used, I would argue misused, to talk about FGM. So presents his own stats is deceptive at best and downright dishonest if you go further. And then lastly, the only thing that was addressed was FGM. We talked about many other issues in that segment, and nothing was refuted. Nothing that we said in the clip about Reza Aslan that we did, the critique of Reza Aslan, nothing was refuted in this article. So people have been emailing me saying, David, wow, there's this Vice piece. It's really taking down your critique of Reza Aslan. Well, hold on a second. Doesn't refute anything I said. It's riddled with provable inaccuracies, which I've just demonstrated to you with my email exchange and so many other things. This is a real problem. This is a real problem. And by the way, let me just lastly say, she sort of defends the FGM thing by saying Pakman doesn't mention, it's not mentioned that 80% of Muslims do not practice FGM. That if you believe that, that still means 1 out of 5 Muslims are practicing female genital mutilation. That's hundreds of millions of Muslims. That is no great victory in responding to our critique. Last thing, immediately after, Reza Aslan is quoted responding to YouTubers making clips, and he says, hey, anyone can just get on YouTube and say whatever the hell they want to, ignoring the fact that there's documented evidence, statistics, facts, and independent analyses supporting these statements. That's the magic of the internet. This is really sad. It is very sad that if you don't know anything about the David Pakman Show or Reza Aslan, or the fact that we used many of the same citations he uses, but really looked at them in more depth, you might say, wow, this David Pakman sounds like a really bad guy. He's out there lying on the internet. Meanwhile, you've just read an article that refutes absolutely nothing. Really dangerous stuff, and this is just being published on the internet. Send me your thoughts about this. Before we go to break, the membership offer continues. 16% off and a free 32 gigabyte USB 3.0 flash drive with the David Pakman Show logo on both sides. I told you yesterday our goal is to send out 100 of these flash drives. I would love to do that. As of yesterday, we were at 13. We had a great day yesterday, and we are now up to 23. We're a quarter of the way there after just a few days. Remember, you can get a free flash drive with a discounted membership, or if you just want the flash drive, you can just get the flash drive. Both options are available at davidpakman.com/flash drive. I appreciate the 23 people who have already supported us through this special. Consider this. It's a discounted membership offer, and you'll get a free flash drive. We've never offered them before. You will be one of the only people who has these. They're not available outside of this membership special at all. davidpakman.com/flash drive is the place to grab that.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Anthony Ford. Anthony, thank you so much for supporting our show. We're mostly viewer funded, and Anthony's support and everybody else's support has really helped the program grow. For the next few days, you can get a 16% discount off of membership plus a free 32 gigabyte David Pakman Show USB 3.0 flash drive. Sign up at davidpakman.com/flash drive. I have more video of an incoherent Sarah Palin once again attempting to use the English language to say something about politics, and it didn't go particularly well. Sarah Palin is furious that Speaker of the House Paul Ryan is not supporting her buddy, Donald Trump, and she went on State of the Union with CNN's Jake Tapper to talk about it. She says that things could be looking really bad for Paul Ryan. This could be the end of Paul Ryan's career. You'll notice if you're watching, everything now seems like a parody. Obviously, the way Sarah Palin speaks has been a parody of itself for a very long time. But now she has this whole frazzled, shell-shocked hair look, and she's looking all around like a bomb just went off next to her. It all seems like Tina Fey's impersonation of Sarah Palin. But as far as I know, this is the real Palin. Let's take a look.
I think Paul Ryan is soon to be cantered as an Eric Cantor. His political career is over, but for a miracle, because he has so disrespected the will of the people. And as the leader of the GOP, the convention, certainly he is to remain neutral, and for him to already come out and say who he will not support was not a wise decision of his. I think why Paul Ryan is doing this, Jake, is it kind of screws his chances for the 2020 presidential bid that he's gunning for. If the GOP were to win now, that wouldn't bode well for his chances in 2020, and that's what he's shooting for.
So Sarah Palin is sort of suggesting that Paul Ryan wants to run for president in 2020. If you have an incumbent Republican in 2020 in Donald Trump, that doesn't really create a good scenario for Paul Ryan to run. So thus, Paul Ryan wants to bring down Trump so that Hillary or Bernie win, thus opening the door for Paul Ryan to run in 2020. Now, here's where it really goes unhinged. As if the first segment wasn't crazy enough, Palin insinuates that Paul Ryan had better be careful because she is putting her insurmountable, overwhelming political clout behind Paul Ryan's primary challenger in Wisconsin, a Trump supporter named Paul Nealon. Listen to this warning from Sarah Palin. Take a listen. Take a look.
That's a good question. Seeing as I haven't even got to call him and tell him that I'm supporting him. But yes, I will do whatever I can for Paul Nealon. This man is a hard-working guy, so in touch with the people. Paul Ryan and his ilk, their problem is they have become so disconnected from the people whom they are elected to represent, as evidenced by Paul Ryan's refusal to support the GOP frontrunner that we just said he's our man.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so is anyone scared of Sarah Palin at this point? If anyone knows about political careers being over, it is Sarah Palin, so maybe she is qualified to comment on people's careers being over. If she really wants to kill Paul Ryan's career, run for president with the guy. It'll be over. We'll never hear from the guy again. And the real shock here is she's appearing on State of the Union with Jake Tapper on CNN. I mean, since that press conference she gave where she endorsed Trump incoherently, she hasn't been seen very much. So I consider Palin sort of what's a good analogy? Like an untrustworthy hand grenade. It'll definitely do some damage, but it'll mess up everybody who's nearby, and you don't want to be close when Sarah Palin, the hand grenade, explodes. Okay, we've been talking about North Carolina's HB2 law, known the transgender bathroom law, colloquially. It bans people from using public bathrooms that don't correspond with their biological sex at birth. And since its passage in March, the law has become a huge battleground on transgender rights. And we now have counter lawsuits going on. The Justice Department, on their part, have filed a civil rights lawsuit over the law against North Carolina. North Carolina officials have filed suits against the federal government's directive to stop implementing HB2. And now it's getting interesting because the state's public university system, which is very powerful, North Carolina, their what would you call it, K through 12 education really has some problems. But the state's public universities, there are a number of very, very good public universities in North Carolina, and they are lobbying around, defying the governor and the legislature and saying, we are going to be in compliance with the federal law, not with House Bill number 2. The Justice Department is threatening to curtail federal funding to the Department of Public Safety at the University of North Carolina, for example. And the universities don't want to get involved in this. They want to be on the side of not being bigots. Attorney General Loretta Lynch, in announcing the U.S. legal action to reporters yesterday, referred to the bathroom bill issue as the latest civil rights struggle of the era, saying it was not so long ago that states, including North Carolina, had other signs above their restrooms, water fountains, and on public accommodations. I think this is interesting. You know, it's important to remember that every struggle for rights is different. So the struggle for racial equality is different from the struggle for gay marriage, for example, and that's different than what we now are seeing is the struggle for equality for the transgender community with regard to public accommodations and facilities. But it's okay to recognize the parallels in the types of struggles generally, and that's exactly what Loretta Lynch is doing. And what I want to remind everybody is these accusations that we're seeing against the transgender community, for example, they're pedophiles. They're going to be sexually assaulting kids, or it opens the door for anybody. Any dude can put on a dress and go in and assault kids. Number one, this is the same playbook from the anti-gay rhetoric we heard from for decades. And that's number one. It's almost literally the exact same phrasing that was used. And number two, it really repels all logic because one doesn't need to put on a dress to go assault people in the women's bathroom. We already have laws about sexual assault. And the idea that trans women going to the men's room won't cause a stir, as if everything will just be fine, really is coming from people who are living in a fantasy world. So we've seen the different levels of the struggle. Before it was, can gay people legally be in the US? Is anal sex illegal via sodomy laws? We got past that, right? Level 2 was fine. We can't control what people do in the bedroom, but no marriage for gay couples. Absolutely no marriage. We've gotten past that. And now the next level is happening on a few fronts. Number one, the shift to the transgender bathroom stuff with the same playbook, the pedophile sexual assault stuff we used to hear about the gay community. And the discussion has shifted from marriage to religious freedom to discriminate. And we've been talking about that. I remain optimistic. I think that this is eventually going to be resolved. Someone new will be scapegoated. There's always someone to scapegoat. But I remain optimistic. If you think this is really here to stay, this transgender bathroom stuff, let me know because I just don't see it. We'll take a break. Coming up next, our investigation into safe spaces versus free spaces at American universities.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The U.S. has some of the greatest universities and colleges in the world, attracting countless students from all over the globe, influencing worldwide academia with respect to everything from pedagogy and research to academic culture. And this is why it's so important for these institutions to maintain their integrity as safe havens for free and open discourse. And unfortunately, so many of our campuses have experienced shifts, especially recently, that threaten open intellectual debate and the idea of having a free marketplace of ideas. In plenty of ways over the last decade or so, and even more noticeably in the past year or two, we've seen unprecedented levels of emotional hypersensitivity, political correctness enforcement, and suppression of controversial views on campuses here and elsewhere in the Western world. Political correctness and zealotry are nothing new in academia and among college students, but certainly the university atmosphere has become more a place of ideological supremacy and political hysteria in different aspects, with new emergences of safe spaces, trigger warnings, and censorship.
Sometimes, there are folks on college campuses who are liberal and maybe even agree with me on a bunch of issues who sometimes aren't listening to the other side. I've heard some college campuses where they don't want to have a guest speaker who, is too conservative. I don't agree that when you become students at colleges, have to be coddled and protected from different points of view.
Language on campus is often being policed to the point of delirium. There's a new reinforced touchiness about microaggressions and cultural appropriations, and it's now more taboo than ever to discuss or even acknowledge Islam's relationship with extremism or express opinions that are affirmative of Israel. Radical feminists at a new rate are appealing to onslaughts and censorship to protect their ideas, and safe spaces providing shelter for all of this are being sanctioned to completely irrational lengths by students and universities. It's worth mentioning that on environments like college campuses, where young people are in the process of forming political orientations, this is also terrible PR for liberalism itself. Taking political correctness to these extremes It's misleading students into thinking that this is what being progressive is all about. It's causing them to throw out liberalism altogether when they observe how some progressives are just defying common sense.
I don't agree with that.
Then why the did you accept the position?
Because
Who
I
the
have
hired you?
Progressivism is no doubt crucial to the advancement of society, and I mean it with the utmost sincerity when I say that what I'm describing about college campuses can only be a disservice to the long-term survival of the progressive movement. The elements of the left that are regressive are enforcing their agendas to a point of diminishing return. Let's look at just a few examples only from the past couple of years. In 2015, the University of New Hampshire issued an official memo to its student body called the Bias-Free Language Guide, which encouraged all students to avoid using certain words, including homosexual, senior citizen, overweight, speech impediment, sexual preference, manpower, freshman, mailman, chairman, and dumb. Pretty dumb. Of course, the phasing out of things like racial and sexual epithets over the 20th century has been an important and hugely positive change, but this type of over-the-top political correctness is categorically authoritarian and to a whole new degree, and I seriously doubt that it serves any actual productive purpose. There's certainly nothing liberal about policing people's language to this extreme. In April of last year, an event was held by a residence building at the University of California, Santa Cruz for students to come have dinner and socialize, and organizers provided a burrito buffet for the students. Each of these events that they hold has a different theme with different decorations, and this time the theme happened to be outer space and science fiction with decorations that included things like spaceships and aliens. UCSC ended up publicly apologizing on behalf of the event's organizers about the food that was served because there were some people who perceived that the matchup, burritos and outer space, to be a suggestion that Mexican food is strange or outlandish, and organizers earnestly insisted that there was no connection whatsoever between the food and the outer space theme, but program staff were nevertheless reprimanded and required to attend cultural sensitivity training. The movement to reduce transgender stigma recently has been a wonderful thing, and I'm a huge supporter. I support things like the boycotting of states that discriminate against transgender people, and the transgender rights movement still definitely has its work cut out, but political correctness around some corners of this issue has also gotten out of hand. Last year, Mount Holyoke College, a school in Massachusetts, had been planning to put on a production of the Vagina Monologues, a well-known and really frequently performed feminist play. But soon thereafter, the college announced that they were going to cancel the play, claiming that the title, The Vagina Monologues, was disrespectful to transgender women without vaginas. The school issued a public apology for even considering to put on the play, explaining that the title of the play failed to affirm transgender women who don't have vaginas.
And we are mindful that exclusion from the category of woman based on contingent properties of birth is nothing new.
Last summer at UCLA, a student wrote an article in the school newspaper arguing that low-income women in the U.S. should be provided with better access to tampons, and that this would be a big step in the right direction for gender equality in healthcare. Makes sense. The student was forced to publicly apologize and amend her article after backlash that accused her of implying that menstruation is a women's issue. The online newspaper was also compelled to go back and add disclaimers at the top of the article to appease those who had a problem with it. Feminism, another domain where we see some overbearing political correctness and censorship on campuses. Laura Kipnis is a professor at Northwestern who teaches on topics related to communications, feminism, and gender relations. And in February of 2015, she wrote an essay in the Chronicle of Higher Education where she mainly critiqued the attitudes and tactics of fanatical, regressive feminists, saying that modern radical feminism has actually infantilized women in many ways and has undone decades of productive feminism. Ironically, in response to her article, there was widespread distraught backlash and protest against her at Northwestern, and 2 feminist students simultaneously filed Title IX complaints against her. The 2 students brought the charges on the grounds that her article supposedly retaliated against victims of sexual harassment at Northwestern. One of the students' charges was against Kipnis's article itself, and the charge filed by the other student was actually specifically in regard to Kipnis's Twitter feed, referencing tweets that she had written about the same topic. Both charges were completely unprecedented in their nature.
So when I found out, I got this letter from the Title IX office that complaints had been filed against me under Title IX, and I, like everyone else, thought, well, doesn't this have to do with like gender discrimination or sexual harassment? I wasn't that familiar with it, and I didn't see how it could apply to an article. And I was being charged with retaliation, and I didn't see how I could be charged with retaliation if I hadn't committed some sexual misconduct against somebody in the first place that I'd been charged with. So the whole thing was very baffling.
During the investigation, in accordance with Title IX, Kipnis was not allowed to have an attorney or talk about the investigation to anyone, nor was she even informed of the charges before her first interrogation. The investigation came within an inch of costing Kipnis her tenure and career, and investigators only agreed to drop the case upon the conditions that Kipnis would no longer write things like it and that she would publicly apologize for the situation. This is just one of many examples where universities stifle and punish professors for doing what academics are supposed to do, positing philosophical arguments regarding important issues, some of which are going to be dissident and controversial from time to time. What use is a university that not only doesn't allow this to happen, but actually punishes scholars for participating in totally legitimate debates about ethics? Islam is another topic where we see this form of authoritarian so-called liberalism on campuses. In November of 2015, at the University of California, Merced, a Muslim student went on a stabbing spree, seriously injuring 4 people. Afterwards, a federal investigation determined that the student's acts of violence were explicitly inspired by Islam and jihad, finding an ISIS flag in the student's room, as well as a 2-page jihadist manifesto in his pocket at the time of the stabbings, which specifically outlined the link between the attacks and his Islamic extremism. Following the attack, UC Merced went to great systematic lengths to convince the public and the campus community that the acts were not at all inspired by Islam. And in this effort, the school had seminars about Islamophobia and advocated that the attacks had little to do with religious extremism and were instead a result of masculinity and sexist patriarchy. There is a massive and undeniable tendency in American higher education to whitewash the harmfulness of Islamism because of people's perception of Muslims as an oppressed group, as well as to vilify Israel and Jews, who were often falsely considered not to be a marginalized minority people, in spite of being one of the most historically oppressed groups in the world. Not to mention that Jews make up about 0.2% of the world's population and have been massacred and expelled from their homelands literally countless times throughout history, from the original exile of the Israelites to hundreds of years of enslavement and dispersion in the Roman Empire to, of course, the Holocaust. Earlier this year at UC Berkeley, a top American public school, the most recent meeting of an organization called the Students of Color Conference, made itself an anti-Jewish safe space by openly systematizing its anti-Israeli positions while aggressively ridiculing its Jewish members for not unconditionally denouncing Israel. And in 2014, the Student Senate president at Ohio University created an official Blood Bucket Challenge campaign, a sort of parody of the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, as a sentiment against Israel. Months later, at Goldsmiths University of London in the United Kingdom, the student government voted almost unanimously against a university Holocaust commemoration because they considered it to be too Eurocentrist and colonialist. And finally, I'd like to close with an example that made headlines at the end of 2015, which really perfectly illustrates so much of what is wrong with safe spaces and regressive authoritarianism at U.S. universities. In November of 2015, at the University of Missouri, students rightfully pressured University President Tim Wolf to resign from his post after months of school-wide racial tensions and protests. But here's where things get weird. Then, immediately following Wolf's resignation, a group of student activists held a celebratory rally on campus where they set up a campsite and occupied a large area on outdoor public university property. The students who participated in this event took it upon themselves to declare the area a safe space for their cause, and they hostilely enforced it as such. Tim Tai is an Asian American student at Missouri. He was assaulted for even trying to photograph the event. The rally-goers had absolutely no legal right to privacy whatsoever, and Tai was well within his rights to photograph and move around freely. The students who harassed and restrained him were explicit about their motivations of barring any documentation of the rally. The student group who organized the event said the next day on Twitter, "It's typically white media who don't understand the importance of respecting black spaces. And if you have a problem with us wanting to have our spaces that we create respected, leave." These tweets were later deleted. During the event, a University of Missouri communications professor, Melissa Click, a journalism instructor no less, believe it or not, also participated in the censorship and intimidation of student reporters. She even threatened them with physical violence. It's simply mind-blowing that someone who teaches journalism would sacrifice her values to enforce a safe space in this way.
Hey, can I talk to you?
No, you need to get out.
Well,
you need to get out.
No, I don't.
You need to get out.
I actually don't.
All right. Hey, who wants to help me get this reporter out of here? I need some muscle over here. Help me get him out. You need to get out. You need to get out.
This is public property.
Yeah, I know, that's a really good one. I'm a communication faculty, and I really get that argument. But you need to go.
Historically, the fundamental concept of having safe spaces has been positive and productive. In no way am I criticizing, per se, the idea of having private, designated physical spaces on campuses or at places of business where people know that they will be free from bigotry. For instance, the LGBT community has undoubtedly faced many struggles trying to acquire rights in recent history. And when a college professor does something like put a rainbow decal on his or her office door indicating this is an LGBT-friendly, safe space, there is nothing there to condemn. But what we should be questioning is when places of higher education, environments that exist explicitly to be soil for free discourse, begin creating what they call safe spaces out of communal public areas or even entire campuses in an effort to block certain ideas and scholarship. These problems on campuses seem to largely stem from identity politics. People are caring more about people's identities than their ideas. Postmodernism, which liberals should and theoretically do hold in high regard, is all about the destruction of barriers between ideas. Aggressively imposing one narrative is the opposite of postmodernism.
Anyway, so yeah, I was making what I thought was a relatively uncontroversial point, which is that universities should be centers of learning. Yeah. And this was apparently enough for these feminists to say, this man spews hatred and smear themselves with red blood, assault somebody afterwards. Yeah, just absolutely crazy. I mean, American university campuses are nuts.
And we have to be willing to admit that there is usually a pretty clear threshold between free thought and actual bigotry. There is a difference between writing an academic paper about violence and jihad and being legitimately bigoted against all Muslims as people. There's a difference between having a scholarly debate about rape culture and rape statistics and being sexist. And like I said, sometimes people's arguments about these issues are going to be flat wrong. But as long as we're actually willing to have a debate and flesh out the controversies intellectually, then a university is serving its purpose as a venue for open and uninhibited discourse.
The way to do that is to create a space where a lot of ideas are presented and collide, and people are having arguments, and people are testing each other's theories, and over time, people learn from each other because they're getting out of their own narrow point of view and having a broader point of view.
The point of a liberal education is to broaden one's horizons and to investigate and analyze different and sometimes bad ideas. Safe spaces, as they've manifested in the ways I've discussed, work to counter this by homogenizing thought. Safe spaces are often used as political tools to silence or delegitimize opposing viewpoints or to avoid difficult topics with the ridiculous pretense that students are benefiting.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
One of the biggest questions around the world for humans as people is being happy. How can you be happier? What contributes to happiness? What's a distraction to trying to achieve happiness that we shouldn't worry about? Thousands and thousands of these pseudo-informative articles go viral all the time. These 5 things really increase happiness, or 10 tips to increase happiness from the happiest monk in the world, or whatever. For the first time now, we have something being described as happiness genes, which have been identified. There's been a really big study involving 190 researchers in 140 research centers across 17 countries, and some very specific genetic variants have been located and associated with not only happiness, but other traits as well. This is published in the new issue of the journal Nature, and it's identified genetic variants that are associated not only with happiness, but also feelings of well-being, depression, and neuroticism. It was also found that gene variants are mainly expressed in the tissues of the central nervous system, as well as adrenal and pancreas tissues. This was a meta-analysis done. It came from the data of a huge study involving almost 300,000 people. Sometimes we hear something like this and people will say, oh, so it's all completely genetic. Rarely. Typically what these studies point to is that there are genes for predispositions to certain traits or characteristics. We've talked about this, predispositions to psychiatric conditions, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, which can sometimes be sort of turned on, to use a layman's term, or triggered by life situations, or they can remain dormant for someone's entire life. So this is just the first step in what will undoubtedly be very, very interesting research. And you have to remember, the impact of one genetic variant is very, very small. With IQ studies, with the idea of making people super smart by modifying genetic markers, you would have to modify hundreds and hundreds of markers to predispose someone to have an even marginally higher IQ. That doesn't mean that if you trigger or move all the right genetic variants, it wouldn't have a significant impact, but we have to think about this in the grand scheme of things. So this is very interesting, and of course, real questions as we think about the future of these types of trials. What are the ethics of it? What are the morals of it? And what are the sort of societal implications? Just a first step. Much more on this coming, I'm sure. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail I received. Take a listen.
Yes, David, this is Cynthia. I'd like you to debunk something, kind of Ghost Adventures, like 43 minutes into your show. during your interview with David McAfee. As he said the word spirit, a small light appeared, his throat arched up. I did it frame by frame, and it appeared to get bigger and split into two and then back into one. May have been a reflection. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I wish you'd do a Ghost Adventures kind of debunking on it.
Yeah. No, it is weird. I mean, David McAfee was talking about being spirituality, and he mentions the word, and all of a sudden his image starts shifting in very unusual ways. We determined two things. Number one, David McAfee had what we call a white balance issue on his camera, which means that the color balance shifts, and it can make it look as if there's glowing things on the screen. Also, a bug flew right in front of him at one point, and it looked like his camera may have picked it up, or it at least was visible on camera, and I think that's what people are referring to. We have a great membership special going on right now, davidpakman.com/flash drive. Not only are we offering a discount off of membership, but we will send you a free 32 gigabyte David Pakman Show USB 3.0 flash drive. We've never given these out before. We've never had these before. They're tremendous. They're terrific. They're compelling for any number of reasons, and I encourage you to grab one at davidpakman.com/flash drive.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.